Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for April the 28th. Today we are reading together in Numbers chapters 23 and 24, which is going to conclude these three chapters of Balaam and his interactions with the Moabite king Balak. Remember, we read yesterday in chapter 22 that Balak is terrified of the Israelites, and the way that he thinks he can gain a victory against them is to hire this prophet for hire. His name is Balaam. He is a prophet of Ashtar, another pagan gods, and he has gained this reputation as being someone who is useful in these type of situations, that he can curse certain people and they lose. He can bless certain people and they win. So Balak thinks that he can hire this man and that he will be able to gain the upper hand against Israel as they are making their march toward the promised land. As he's going to find out, though, here in these chapters, Numbers 23 and Numbers 24, that simply is not going to happen. So let's read about that here within these texts together today. Appreciate so much you tuning in for this reading. Let's get to reading here. Numbers 23 and verse number 1. Numbers 23, verse number 1. Then Balaam said to Balak, "Build me 7 altars here and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams for me." So Balak did as Balaam directed, and they offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Balaam said to Balak, "Stay here by your burnt offering while I am gone. Maybe Yahweh will meet with me. I will tell you whatever he reveals to me." So he went to a barren hill. God met with him, and Balaam said to him, "I have arranged 7 altars and offered a bull and a ram on each altar." Then Yahweh put a message in Balaam's mouth and said, "Return to Balak and say what I tell you." Verse number 6, so he returned to Balak, who was standing there by his burnt offering, with all his officials of Moab. Balaam proclaimed his poem. "Balak brought me from Aram, the king of Moab, from eastern mountains. Come, put a curse on Jacob for me. Come, denounce Israel." How can I curse someone God has not cursed? How can I denounce someone Yahweh has not denounced? I see them from the top of rocky cliffs, and I watch them from the hills. There is a people living alone. It does not consider itself among the nations. Who has counted the dust of Jacob, or numbered even 1/4 of Israel? Let me die the death of the upright. Let the end of my life be like theirs. "What have you done to me?" Balak asked Balaam. "I brought you to curse my enemies, but look, you have only blessed them." He answered, "Shouldn't I say exactly what Yahweh puts in my mouth?" Then Balak said to him, "Please, come with me to another place where you can see them. You will only see the outskirts of their camp. You won't see all of them. From there, put a curse on them for me." So Balak took him to Lookout Field on top of Pisgah, built 7 altars, and offered a bull and ram on each altar. Balaam said to Balak, "Stay here by your burnt offering while I seek Yahweh over there." Yahweh met with Balaam and put a message in his mouth. Then he said, "Return to Balak and say what I tell you." So he returned to Balak, who was standing there by his burnt offering with the officials of Moab. Balak asked him, "What did Yahweh say?" Balaam proclaimed this poem. "Balak, get up and listen. Son of Zippor, pay attention to what I say. God is not a man that he might lie, or a son of man that he might change his mind. Does he speak and not act, or promise and not fulfill? I have indeed received a command to bless. Since he has blessed, I cannot change. He considers no disaster for Jacob. He sees no trouble for Israel. Yahweh their God is with them, and there is rejoicing over the king among them. God brought them out of Egypt. He is like the horn of a wild ox for them. There is no magic curse against Jacob, and no divination against Israel. It will now be said about Jacob and Israel, what great things God has done. A people rise up like a lioness. They rouse themselves like a lion. They will not lie down until they devour the prey and drink the blood of the slain. Then Balak told Balaam, "Don't curse them and don't bless them. But Balaam answered, didn't I tell you, whatever Yahweh says, I must do? Again, Balak said to Balaam, please come. I will take you to another place. Maybe it will be agreeable to God that you put a curse on them for me there. So Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor, which overlooks the wasteland. Balaam told Balak, build me 7 altars here and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams for me. So Balak did as Balaam said and offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Since Balaam saw that it pleased Yahweh to bless Israel, he did not seek omens as on previous occasions, but turned toward the wilderness. When Balaam looked up and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, the Spirit of God came on him, and he proclaimed this poem. The oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eyes are opened, the oracle of one who hears the sayings of God, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who falls into a trance with his eyes uncovered. How beautiful are your tents, Jacob, your dwellings, Israel. They stretch out like river valleys, like gardens beside a stream, like aloes Yahweh has planted, like cedars beside the water. Water will flow from his buckets, and his seed will only be by abundant water. His king will be greater than Agag, and his kingdom will be exalted. God brought him out of Egypt. He is like the horns of a wild ox for them. He will feed on enemy nations and gnaw their bones. He will strike them with his arrows. He crouches. He lies down like a lion or a lioness who dares to rouse him. Those who bless you will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed. Then Balak became furious with Balaam, struck his hands together, and said to him, I summoned you to put a curse on my enemies, but instead you have blessed them these 3 times. Now go to your home. I said I would reward you richly, but look, Yahweh has denied you a reward. Balaam answered Balak, didn't I previously tell the messengers you sent me? If Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go against Yahweh's command to do anything good or bad of my own will. I will say whatever Yahweh says. Now, I am going back to my people, but first, let me warn you that let me warn you what these people will do to your people in the future. Verse 15, he proclaimed his poem. The oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eyes are opened, the oracle of one who hears the sayings of God and has knowledge from the Most High, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who falls into a trance with his eyes uncovered. I see him, but not now. I perceive him, but not near. A star will come from Jacob, and a scepter will arise from Israel. He will smash the forehead of Moab and strike down all the Shethites. Edom will become a possession, and Seir will become a possession of his enemies, but Israel will be triumphant. One who comes from Jacob will rule. He will destroy the city's survivors. Then Balaam saw Amalek and proclaimed his poem. Amalek was first among the nations, but his future is destruction. Next he saw the Kenites and proclaimed his poem. Your dwelling is enduring, your nest is set in cliffs. Cain will be destroyed when Ashur takes you captive. Once more he proclaimed his poem. Who can live when God does this? Ships will come from the coast of Kittim. They will carry out raids against Ashur and Eber, and they will come to destruction. But they too will come to destruction. Balaam then arose and went back to his homeland, and Balak also went his way. And that is Numbers 23 and Numbers 24. All right, so taking these 2 chapters together, because they really do go well together. There's really not even a true break, I don't think, between these 2 chapters at all. So we'll look at them in their entirety together, make some observations. Number 1, just want to note the pattern that we see within this chapter. Again, there's sets of 3. I mentioned that yesterday, that this story involving Balaam involves a number of sets of 3. Here, there are 3 major oracles Some count a fourth, fifth, and sixth of the short oracles that are added on at the end of chapter 24. So you could say there's 3, you could say there's 6. You're really not wrong either way. It just depends on how you divide them up. But of these 3 main oracles, they follow a pretty consistent pattern. Number 1, Balak takes Balaam to a high place, so to a place where they can worship. Number 2, Balak. Let's see here. Balak builds 7 altars and offers 7 bulls and rams, 1 on each of these altars. Number 3, Balaam tells Balak to stay here with your offering while I go off to seek Yahweh, to seek God, see what he says. Number 4, Yahweh gives Balaam an oracle of blessing for Israel. Number 5, Balaam comes back and pronounces an extended and a very strong blessing on Israel in front of Balak. And then finally, Balaam says, after he's questioned about this, he says, listen, I can only say what God tells me to say. We see that pretty consistently in chapter 23, beginning in verse, kind of going back into chapter 22, we see the number 1 there where they kind of go to the high place together. But then we see that in chapter 23, verse 1 through chapter 23, verse 12. We see it start over in chapter 23, verse 13, going through chapter 23 and verse 26. We see it repeat again, beginning in chapter 23, verse 27, going through chapter 23 and verse 13. So we see this pattern show up time and time again. You might note that in the first oracle, in verse number 8, Balaam really just lays it all out right here. He says, how can I curse someone God has not cursed? How can I denounce someone that Yahweh has not denounced? Basically, I can't undo what God has done. Very short and sweet. Nothing really of groundbreaking here. He doesn't really allude to much else. He basically just talks about the people, how strong the people are. They've obviously been blessed. What can I do to undo this blessing that Yahweh has given to his people? Well, Balak says, well, let's just go over here to this other place. You won't be able to see the entire people, but you'll see just a few of them, and maybe you can just curse those few of Israel. Maybe just do that for me. So again, they go through this process again, and this time the proclamation of this poem speaks to the character of God. Now, he's not a man, he can't lie. He's not a son of man, he can't change his mind. I have been given this command to bless, and since he has blessed them, I cannot change that blessing. He considers no disaster for Jacob, no trouble for Israel. They're going to rejoice with him as their king. And oh, by the way, let us not forget that the Exodus did take place. And this is how we can know that God is with them. He brought them out of Egypt. He is to them like the horns of a wild ox. He is their strength and their power. You cannot overcome them. They will be successful. Again, Balaam's response, just stop talking at this point. You're not going to curse them. Well, don't bless them too. Just shut up. Picks up again, verse 27 of chapter 23. Again, come, let's go to another place. And maybe this time it will be agreeable for you to put a curse on them at this point. So they go through the process again. They make their altars, offer the sacrifices. But notice chapter 24, verse 1. Since Balaam saw that it pleased Yahweh to bless Israel, he did not go seek omens as on previous occasions, but turned toward the wilderness. Very interesting. Again, we need to recognize that Balaam is not a good person. Even though he might have these little glimpses of maybe saying things that are righteous, for the most part, like, for example, back in chapter 23, verse 10, he says, let me die the death of the upright. That sounds good. That sounds promising, except he doesn't. We're going to see that here in the next few chapters. But he's really just looking out for self. He's always about catching the next bag of money, selling himself for profit, whatever he's got to do, that's what he's going to do. So he's not a good guy. That's why this time it seems that he does not seek Yahweh, but the Spirit comes upon him. And in doing so, again, there's blessings upon God's people. Specifically, verse number 7, water will flow from his buckets, and his seed will be by abundant water. Is this talking about water? Is this talking about offspring? That's a possible understanding of this. His king will be greater than Agag, something that there might be a tie into Esther, a prophecy of Esther here mentioned. But again, the Exodus is mentioned in verse number 8. Again, the horns, the wild ox, their strength and power. And finally, there is a correction for how Balak really messed things up earlier. Going back to chapter 22 and verse number 6, Balak speaks to Balaam, and he makes this claim concerning Balaam's power. I know, Balak says, that those you bless are blessed and those you curse are cursed. So he's applying what belongs to God to Balaam. And now Balaam speaks the truth here in verse number 9 of chapter 24. He crouches, he lies down like a lion or a lioness. Who dares to rouse him? Those who bless you will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed. All this is tied in with Yahweh. It all belongs to him. He will carry out his will in this situation. So Balak, again, is furious with Balaam. He struck his hands together. I don't know if he's clapping or if he's just beating his hands together. And he says, you're done. Just get out of here. You're not having a payday. This Yahweh who you're speaking on behalf of, he's cost you the payday. Balaam says, listen, and this is for the third time again. Remember those 6 things that Balaam brings Balak into a high place. Number 2, he offers sacrifices. Number 3, Balaam tells him to stay here. I'm going to go seek Yahweh. Number 4, Yahweh gives him an oracle. Number 5, Balaam comes back and gives the oracle. Then number 6, after Balak gets upset about it, he says, listen, I told you, I can only say what Yahweh wants me to say. Them's the rules. That's how we're operating here in the situation. But then he says, before you go, I'm going to go back to my people. You're going to go back to your people. Before you go, here are some final warnings. Here are some final oracles for you. What I want to note from here is verse 17, where he says, I see him, but not now. I perceive him, but not near. A star will come from Jacob, and a scepter will rise from Israel. He will smash the forehead of Moab. He will strike down all the Shethites. Edom will become a possession. Seir will become a possession of its enemies. But Israel will be triumphed. One who comes from Jacob will rule. He will destroy the city's survivors. First application, I think a lot of this is probably referring to David. This is a Davidic promise. Specifically, David did conquer Moab and Edom. But even more so, this was referring to the one who's going to be the greater David. I think here we see a promise of the Messiah here in chapter 24 of Numbers in verse numbers 17, 18, and 19. Well, then we have the 5th, 6th, and possible 7th oracles to Amalek, to the Kenites, and then to some random people. And then the chapter finishes up in verse 25. Again, Balaam rises and goes his way, and Balak also goes his way. But that's not the end of the story, not the end of the interactions with these individuals. Let me double check my math here. I'm pretty sure it's either in this chapter or later on we're going to see Balaam mentioned again. And again, we're going to see how things did not end very well for him within this narrative, within this portion, within this interaction with God and his people. Certainly things are not going to end up well for Moab either, but again, the shortcomings, the weaknesses of the people, they're going to show their ugly head here in the next chapter, chapter 25, that we'll read tomorrow. And then we'll also read the second census in chapter 26, which really is going to show us the transition to this new generation. That first census concerning that previous generation, it's done with. Now here's the second census. Now here the second generation really shows up on the scene to become the full-time main characters. One thing I do want to mention here is all this is 20, 22, 23, and 24. I don't think Moses is really mentioned anywhere within this section. There's no interaction between Yahweh and his people. It's only between Yahweh and these pagans. I wonder how much Israel knew, if at all, what was going on here. And that made me think, sometimes God, or here in the story, then God is protecting Israel, and they don't seem to have any idea about it. I wonder how God does that for us. I wonder in what ways God protects us and provides for us, and we have no idea about it. Maybe it would be a bad idea to, at times, just thank God for that. Thank God for taking care of the things that we just don't know about. I think that would be a prayer probably all of us would do well in praying from time to time. Here again, maybe another main takeaway is you can't go against Yahweh. Whatever he says is going to happen, it's going to happen. He might allow things to happen that he doesn't want to happen from time to time, but here in this instance, he puts his foot down. He says, nope, you're not going to curse my people. They are mine. They are blessed. They will triumph and they will win. I appreciate so much you tuning into this reading on this Friday. Come back tomorrow. We'll be reading together from Numbers 25 and then reading the census in Numbers 26, which I know you guys are super excited about, especially to come and to give me some judgments on how I pronounce all of these names that are going to be written in chapter 26. So if you want to come and see that, give me some scores, please feel free to do that. Hope you'll tune in tomorrow as we read together from Numbers 25 and 26. But for today, have a great rest of your Friday. Take care. God bless.